Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Jen Hawes, Partnership Manager at Island Press, and we are so honored to be hosting this conversation today with our esteemed panel. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking about inclusive transportation, celebrating the diverse tapestry of America's biking culture. We hope to this serves as a contribution to the Juneteenth celebrations that we had just yesterday. And let us talk about some logistics. So for the run-up show today, we will have Tamika Butler be providing some opening remarks to introduce the panel. She's also going to be serving as our moderator. And then Veronica Davis is going to be asked the first question and talk about her an upcoming book, Inclusive Transportation. Then we're going to move to Oboi Reed, and he's going to be who's the chairman and founder of Equiticity, and he'll be talking about his work there. And then Michel will be talking about iGo Electric and their e-bikes. We will encourage you to ask questions as the conversation moves forward. You can do that through the questions panel right here. And if you have any trouble today, you can either send me a note through the chat or in the questions panel here. After the webinar is done, if you could please complete the survey that is just short, we would really appreciate that. And I want you to know that the session is being recorded, and we will be sharing that in the next few days. So, let me share a little bit of information about Island Press. This is who's bringing you the webinar today. Island Press is an environmental nonprofit book publisher and so much more. In a world flooded with information, Island Press connects the right ideas with the people who need to build sustainable cities and protect the natural world. Island Press's mission is to elevate voices of change, shine a spotlight on crucial ideas and issues, and focus attention on sustainable solutions. You can learn more about us or make a donation to support our work at islandpress.org. And we are so excited to be sharing Veronica's book, which will be officially coming out in July, but we're offering everyone a special discount on the book. If you'd like to buy it through Island Press, you can get 30% off with the code webinar at checkout from islandpress.org/books/inclusive-transportation. You can also buy the book at major retailers or pre-order the book if it's not yet available. Right, now I'm going to give you introductory bio remarks for our folks today. Tamika Butler, she, her, / they, them, is our moderator today. They're a doctoral student in urban planning at UCLA's Luskin School of Public Affairs, and also the founder and principal of Tamika L. Butler Consulting. Tamika has a JD from Stanford Law School. They are from Omaha, Nebraska, and currently live in LA with their wife and kids. Veronica Davis is joining us today as well. Veronica is a civil engineer, a planner, and a transportation nerd. She's a public speaker, a community activist, and a guest lecturer. Veronica is a poet, a blogger, a lover of art, yoga, and food, and she's a world explorer, mom, and now a book author. Right. Olatunji Oboi Reed is the chairman and CEO of Equiticity Ventures, a racial equity movement programming and advocating for racial equality, increased mobility, and racial justice to improve the lives of Black and Brown people across the United States. With an extensive background in nonprofit management and corporate social responsibility, he is most proud of his work to create a diverse coalition of people, organizations, and businesses all working together to achieve racial equity and mobility justice across Chicagoland, the land of Chicago. And lastly, we have Michel Courval. Michel is IGO Electric's Canadian sales representative. He has been with IGO Electric for nearly 5 years and has a strong background in e-bike store management. Michel's experience lies in leveraging this knowledge to drive business growth and achieve outstanding results for sustainable transportation solutions. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over.
Awesome. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We're seeing a few folks still trickle in, but we tried to kill a little bit of time to allow folks to arrive on whatever time schedule you are coming on. Again, we're here today brought together by Island Press. I feel very lucky and privileged to be a board member at Island Press, but more than that, I feel very lucky and privileged to be a part of this conversation with a few old friends and a new friend in Michel. We're hoping that this just is you all listening to us just sit around and chat like we always do as friends when we get together. But I would be remiss not to give a special thank you to Veronica, who is the reason for us being here. One of my favorite people in the world, someone I look up to tremendously and always say to her, you know, just let me know when you need an assistant and I'll be there. Can't do it in Houston, too hot, but you know, maybe on your next stop. But we're here to celebrate Veronica's book. If you haven't gotten the book, you should. It's amazing. I don't know that everybody is as lucky as me and gets the signed copy, but you know, you should pick up the book. It's beautiful. And whether or not folks understand what it is to write a book, having something tangible that you can hold in your hands that you produced on your own is a big deal, let alone when you are working a full-time job, you know, parenting a small child who's bringing you all the germs. And so, Veronica, congratulations on having the book out there and done. Again, if you haven't bought it, please do. We're here to talk about the book, but more broadly to talk about inclusive transportation, to hear a little bit about what inclusive transportation is. We know some folks when they registered sent in some questions, so we'll try to integrate those things into our conversation. I think I'm supposed to start with 10 minutes of what I think inclusive transportation is, but you know what? You're not here to see me. The reality is, when I read this book, an early draft of the book, and then the finished product, I was lucky enough to be able to provide some feedback. I was really changed by this book, and I don't know why it surprised me, because every time I have a conversation with Veronica, whether or not it's about a technical transportation problem or how to, you know, acquire services for my son in a public school district, right? No matter what it is, I'm changed by those conversations because of her thoughtfulness. And not just her thoughtfulness, but her willingness to listen. And for me, a big part of inclusive transportation is listening. And so that's what we hope you're all here to do today. I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off with a few questions, but we will definitely make sure to leave some time at the end for questions from you all, and I will wrap us up. I have seen kind of the attendees number stop going up, so I think we're in a safe place to start. And I'll start with you, Veronica. What made you want to write a book, period, but what made you want to specifically write this book?
So funny story, when I was 22, I was working for New York City DOT. I was an intern, and it was the day that I didn't have a lot of work. So I wrote this life manifesto. I know, a lot of manifestos, but I was like, my favorite word. So I wrote this life, just like strategic plan, this life manifesto. And one of the things I had in there, so I had things around financial vitality and being able to build generational wealth, not just for my descendants, but just for my broader family, as well as the broader community, and really building that generational wealth. And then another one is I wanted to be a world-renowned transportation expert. And I have those specific words verbatim. And in there, I said, I wanted to write a book. And that was it. And I wanted to testify at Congress, and I wanted to do all these things. And at 22, it's amazing how the vision is so clear when you're not beat up by having to pay bills, having to, you're not beat up by life itself. And so really crafted that vision then. And so then fast forward to 2018, I actually had no intentions, like you just put it out there. And I was on a panel with Andrew Stober and Ignacio at a conference. And my editor, who then became my content editor, Courtney Lenks, walks up to me and says, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I was like, "Well, sure, maybe." And that kind of got the ball rolling. And then as Tamika is aware, and I will share with all of you, Tamika and I really had a chance to connect in Salzburg, Vienna, Austria. And it was a part of a global seminar, and it was a coming together of minds from all across the globe to tackle this issue of equity from a built environment and from an environmental perspective, and the impact that it has on people's health. And we know in this country, when you're talking about hypertension, when you're talking about obesity and all of the different health impacts, poor air quality, a lot of it affects Black and brown communities, even when you control for income. Because a lot of people try to go to the income argument, but when you control for income. And so I had an opportunity to connect with Tamika and a bunch of other beautiful souls that I now call part of my brain and my heart trust. And we came up with this framework for confronting power and privilege. And, I do incorporate that in my book, but in a different way of taking that framework and making it relevant to transportation. And so it's really was a process for writing the book and being able to get words on paper, because I think a lot of us want to do the equity, right? And we can debate definitions. And I even have an entire chapter where I talk about the different definitions of equity. But at the end of the day, getting the words perfect don't matter when people are still dying, when people still don't have access to public transit, when people still don't have sidewalks, when people still don't have the basic options that they need. It doesn't really matter what the definition is. And so being able to look at why things aren't changing and confronting those power structures that I'm in part of my job now. And disclaimer, everything I say here has nothing to do with the city of Houston. But I'm a part of this power structure, which I have more power and more influence in using that to move it further. And so really it was just putting some words on paper. As I think about it, and Tamika, you're in planning school right now. And I remember my time as a planner, and I read these books written by people, and someone had decided that these people were experts in these topics. And as we sat in Salzburg, one of the things that we talked about was who gets to define who the expert is. And it's like, well, you know what? Well, I'm an expert, and I'm going to write this book, and I'm going to get this in the curriculum so that future generations can read these words and become expert and come immersed in these topics. And so that's really was, the reason to do it, even through the tears. There was a lot of tears in writing the book, and thankful to my friends and my brain trust to help get me through. But that's really why I wrote the book. It's to be able to have something that you could read it cover to cover, cool. But I don't want it to be a thing that you read and you just put it back and you pat yourself on the back. I read the equity, but really to take the time and the way, for those of you that have the book, and for those that don't have the book, there are activities at each chapter, because I want you to take a moment to pause and reflect on your life, reflect on why you make the transportation decisions that you make. What are the things that have influenced that? Reflect on what you think equity is, reflect on the policies that are preventing equity from moving forward and what is in your sphere of influence, reflecting on the different stakeholders and who is constantly suffering, no matter who is in your inbox, who is the one that is, who are the groups of people that are constantly suffering. How do we actually integrate the technical part with the engagement part? And then lastly, really the chapter 6 is that call to action. And it's a long-term struggle to actually be able to implement, but what is that call to action? So that is my answer, my opening statement to your question, Tamika.
I appreciate that. Next, I want to go over to you, Oboi. As you already know, of everybody on this panel, you're the favorite in my household. I've told Oboi before, my dad once said to me, I like watching your speeches, but this Oboi fellow, he brings that fire. You need to talk more like him. And so for my dad, if you could really bring the fire, tell us a little bit about Equiticity, but then also what does inclusive transportation mean to you?
I feel a lot of pressure. I hope I meet your father's expectations for the second time. I'll start with a little bit about Equiticity. Equiticity is a racial equity movement operationalizing racial equity by harnessing our collective power through research, advocacy, programs, community mobility rituals, and social enterprises to improve the lives of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people in our society. Our vision is to help establish a mid to large size US city where racial equity is fully integrated at the legislative and policy levels in a way that has never been done in a city that we're aware of, both in the US and around the world. That level of operational commitment to racial equity will put a racial equity lens on every resource, every program, every project under the city's purview, and ensure that Black, Brown, Indigenous communities are being transformed. We're a national organization headquartered in Chicago, in the North Lawndale neighborhood on the west side of Chicago. And I'll just mention a few areas of our work. Under research, we recently completed, well, about a year ago, we completed our Biking Where Black research, where we found in Chicago, Black people are 8 times more likely to be stopped by the police for riding bikes on the sidewalk. And where we're being stopped is usually on large arterial streets with no bike infrastructure. Under advocacy, we're working to establish racially equitable traffic safety in Chicago. Some of the things that we're working to achieve is to ban pretextual stops by the Chicago Police Department, ban bicycle stops, ban jaywalking tickets, decriminalize public transit fare evasion. The gist of what we're doing is to decrease the number of interactions between the police and Black and Brown people. On our program side, we are bringing to a close in the next 2 weeks here, about 2 weeks, our Mobility Opportunities Fund. It's a voucher program for residents of North Lawndale to help them purchase climate-friendly transportation. So those devices include conventional bike, e-bike, e-cargo bike, and electric vehicle. And then on the community mobility rituals work, we do 5 types of rituals: community bicycle rides, neighborhood walking tours, public transit excursions, group scooter rows, and open streets festivals. And then finally, social enterprises. We are working to incubate some business ideas that could one day serve as a financial resource for our organization and serve as a job creation opportunity for our neighborhood. So that's just a little bit about Equiticity. And when I think about inclusive transportation, and I'll be brief here, there's a few things that immediately come to mind. One is operationalizing around racial equity and social equity. So racial equity, of course, is focused on the racially marginalized communities in our society, and social equity is focused on all number of marginalized communities, whether it be income level or gender non-conforming or geography or English as a second language, like any identity that could cause communities to be marginalized. Social equity reflects a commitment to those communities. And then inclusive transportation is having specific strategies for marginalized communities, addressing our specific needs, culture, and history. And then we also focus on and think about repairing both contemporary and historical harms. You know, that stuff, the challenges we face in our communities is a result of many decades of harm. We want to repair for those historical harms and the harms that we're experiencing on a more contemporary basis. And then finally, inclusive transportation should improve life outcomes for marginalized communities. The work we're doing should make life better for marginalized communities. And I just want to say a special thank you to Veronica. I've been watching her up close and from afar for many years, consider her a dear friend, and it's a pleasure to have her book, get to dig into it and be on this panel. So thank you, and a proud salute on the work, Veronica.
Thank you so much, Oboi. So Michel, we're going to come to you next. As I said, my newest friend. I'm excited to hear from you. And something that I heard Oboi say is one of the things that Equiticity helps folks in the community do is access sustainable transportation options, which could include e-bikes. And so I'm just curious as to how you all do your work. So you know a little bit about what you all do. But in your work, how do e-bikes fit into inclusive transportation? And I think this is something that a lot of the folks who've joined who are trying to do this work on the ground are wondering whether or not they're talking about any sort of electrified vehicle. There's always this question on if they can be inclusive given cost, just given resources people have. So I know there's a lot there for you. How do e-bikes fit into inclusive transportation? And especially just given the barriers some people think that they do have, particularly around that price point. So welcome to the conversation. Go ahead and jump in.
Thank you. With regards to making e-bikes inclusive, there is a lot of angles to it. First of all, a little parenthesis, I used to be a personal trainer. I studied in kinesiology. And about a decade ago, when a headhunter reached out to me and says, you should look this up, the e-bike industry is going to boom. He thought I'd turn him down because this is something that is regarded a lot still today, unfortunately, as something that is for people who are cheating. But e-bike can help so many people in so many ways. First of all, not everybody can afford a car. A lot of communities don't have the money to get a car and all the expenses that comes along with that. An e-bike can beat the traffic in high density cities, high density populations. The e-bike will beat the traffic to go to work. It will also cost a fraction of what a car will cost. Also, it's going to help people go back to exercising that were not active at all, that were deactivated. So somebody who's not able to go for a walk because for some joint issues or even sometimes weight issues, riding a bike is much easier, but it also allows you to do some kind of work. Actually, there's a study in Europe many years ago that demonstrated that they took 3 groups. I love that study. They took a control group, a group where they landed normal bikes, and a group with e-bikes. And they told them, we're giving you those bikes for 2 months. We're assessing your fitness condition now, and we're going to see you in 2 months without prescribing any use of those bikes. When they came back for the second assessment, the control group, there was no changes, as we can guess. The group with the regular bike had a little bit of an improvement, and the e-bikes had a bigger improvement of their fitness condition. And the reason is simply because they were on it more often. The day there's too much wind or you're feeling under the weather, you're going to jump on your bike anyway. You're just going to ask the bike to help you a little more than you would otherwise. And you're going to be moving, and you're going to do something you were not going to do at all otherwise. So these communities where poverty has a big impact on their health, the e-bike helps in that angle as well. Also, people who are already doing exercises but are in groups that are very uneven, the one who jumps on an e-bike, it's going to even out the terrain for that person. So let's say 2 partners ride always together, one is much stronger, is testing his patient or her patient because the other one is a little bit slower, and the other one feels bad and stressed because the other partner is being slowed down. Then put one on an e-bike and they both can enjoy the ride together. I had this gentleman years ago came to me, had a prosthesis from his head down. He lost his leg at 15 years old, and he was 65 when he came to me, and his wife was super fit and was riding. And he said, can you do something for me so I can ride with her? We found him a bike with the technologies that were appropriate for him, and he came back a few weeks later. To this day, I have the goosebump when I think about this story. He said, "I'm able to have this activity with my partner, and it has been 50 years since the last time he had ridden a bike." So all these people can now get either fitter or go to work faster at a fraction of the price.
Thank you so much. That's a really good point, right? That cost, first of all, I think as e-bikes are becoming more prolific, that's impacting costs. But beyond that, a lot of folks can't afford a car. That's not an option for them, or based on physical ability. You know, e-bikes really allow more folks to be able to participate in something that I think and know all of us on the call really enjoy. And I remember the first time I got on an e-bike, I was like, whoa, this is cool. And I was just at a birthday party this weekend for my 5-year-old, and everyone knows what I do. And some parents came over to me and said, we just got an e-bike and it changed our lives. Like, it's changing how we're going to school. It's changing how we run quick errands. And beyond that, I think what a lot of us also see is e-bikes can be sort of like a gateway drug, right? And all of a sudden there was a city council transportation committee meeting, and this family went. And they wanted to talk about bike lanes in their community, and they wanted to talk about the quality of sidewalks in their community and why we're prioritizing cars. And so I think it does really, really matter. Veronica, I want to move to you and ask, you know, you've worked in a lot of different sectors, you've worked in a lot of different parts of the country, and we got some questions in just about, you know, how does this work in mid-levels and mid-sized cities? How does this work in different places? I love your perspective on how inclusive transportation looks different in these different geographical contexts.
You know, having worked in different cities, honestly, I feel like the smaller cities are doing better. You know, the smaller cities tend to have less bureaucracy or less segmentation of responsibility. You know, one of the challenges that I have in my current role is I don't own everything. Like, I don't own the entire thing in order to get it done. I have to rely on another department, or it falls in the gray area. And so we bounce things back and forth until we can figure out, well, who owns this action or who owns this item? And that is a challenge once you get to bigger cities. It is just a more complex government. And so you have these smaller cities like Chattanooga, and the fact that they're able to implement things a lot faster. You know, Ithaca, New York, where I went to grad school, even with its hilliness, you know, the fact that they're able to get things done, and they have a very robust public transit system, even in a very rural city. So I think that in terms of how to implement, I think the smaller cities have it a lot easier. It's really more about having the focus and the ability to say, you know what, we are going to look at whether it's a high injury network, or we are going to focus on these communities that have been historically disinvested. I think that they are going to get there a lot faster than some of the bigger cities, because as Oboi said, this is decades and decades and decades, centuries, right, of disinvestment. And so even as you come in, you're trying to move something forward, but it's like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. You might never, you know, you feel like it feels overwhelming. And then kind of a tangent, but even with the funding that is available under the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're not there, you know, as we look at, you know, the money that's available for electric vehicles, but bikes were left out, right? So we talk about the fact that I've been taking notes. You know, Michel mentioned the study that, you know, people with e-bikes had bigger health improvements, but that wasn't included. There is no subsidy or nothing that helps people to be able to afford e-bikes, even as the price is going down. Just by scale, it's still not there or accessible for a lot of people. So it's like we're almost there, but we're still missing some pieces in order to be able to pull it all together both from a funding perspective. I mean, even with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the money that is available for infrastructure, you have many states that are still widening roads through the communities that they already built the road through in the 1960s. So as we talk about, Oboi talked about it, about not repairing the past harm and then doing no existing harm. We're not doing that. We are attempting to repair the harm by, let's put a park under the highway to connect the community that was divided. And then we're going to widen that road. We're going to ride the highway too. So we're not quite there as a country. And, you know, those are conversations that need to be had.
And, you know, just a quick follow-up for you, Veronica. You answered a question we had that came out of Oregon, like, you know, this mid-sized, small-sized city question. But we had another question about what's the different political context in these places, right? And a lot of us who aren't in Texas hear a lot about the political context in Texas. So not getting yourself in trouble. But what is it like, you know, going from a place like DC, where some folks may say there is no representation, being in a place like Texas, but I know as a private consultant, you've kind of worked all over. So how do these different political contexts impact the work of inclusive transportation?
You know, I'll actually be honest. You know, there is the political context of the state that drives a lot of things. But then there's also the political structure of the city, and they're all different. You know, some are strong mayor, some are mayor council, some are strong, you know, city manager. And so that probably, you know, they say all politics are local. I think that is a bigger impact than even the state politics. I'm not saying that it's not there, but I think that's a bigger impact. You know, I have worked in strong mayor form of government, and you can actually rock and roll because you just gotta, it's one power, one influencer that you have to convince or convey the need to get this done. And so it comes down to that particular individual, and when they're ready to roll, you can roll. In some cities, you know, where you have that mayor council, and now you're in a different ball game, and now you have more people that you have to convince to be able to move something forward. And then I'll say, even working as a consultant in DC, then you throw in the federal government, especially depending on where you are, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's just one little piece of land that happens to be park service, and now I got to go through a whole NEPA process for a bike lane, you know. And so you have, so it really comes down to different contexts. And you know, even being here, there are things that make it challenging because you do feel a heightened sense of I have to be ready to fight that I didn't feel in other cities. But ultimately, you know, we are able to implement significantly faster than I have in other contexts, and mainly it's because of a strong mayor form of government and a mayor that has a focus on being transformative.
Super helpful. And Oboi, I'd love you to follow up on something you know, Veronica just said. When the feds get involved, sometimes you're like, oh, now I got to go through this process or this process. I think the flip side of that is sometimes, and we had a planner from the city of Boston mention this, right? Like sometimes bicycle facilities or any improvements, right? It could be parks. But you know, these things are viewed as the first sign of gentrification. So maybe some folks in the community really want that e-bike share program, but as soon as it drops, they're like, all right, who's this for? Like, you know, there goes the neighborhood. And so when you're trying to balance this idea of, you know, not wanting to gentrify and displace a community, when you're trying to balance having really great community engagement, but at the same time, not letting that slow down a project that will save lives, how do we achieve community ownership of transportation planning processes that are impacting these, you know, communities of color, Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, immigrant communities, low-income communities that desperately need, you know, the infrastructure but have all of those tensions. So how do you all approach that work?
Wow. Thank you. That's a massive question. So I'll talk about three things. First, I'll talk about how we think about community ownership. I'll talk about how we think about ensuring gentrification and displacement does not come as a result of beautiful infrastructure in our communities. And there was one other thing I was thinking about, but maybe it'll come to me. So we do advocate for Black and Brown communities having ownership of the transportation planning processes that impact our neighborhoods. Now, when we say that, sometimes planners get a little nervous. They start sweating. We're not suggesting that DOTs and MPOs are completely boxed out, because DOTs and MPOs bring resources, financial resources, technical expertise, parameters. We need that partnership with DOTs and MPOs. What we're advocating for is a departure away from a focus on public engagement, like a check the box approach, where you plan a meeting, you send out some invites, people show up, they give you some feedback on some plans that you already developed, and you're just asking us to help shape them. What we want to see is a full partnership between people in our neighborhoods, community-based organizations in our neighborhoods, and the agencies implementing projects in our neighborhoods. And for us, there's a few things that are important to bring that partnership to bear. One, agencies and government must see, experience, and reward our humanity and our God-given right to live free and prosper. The policies, the legislation, the projects should be imbued with this acknowledgement of our humanity. I'm talking about Black and Brown people. Number two, invite Black and Brown-led community-based organizations to own the planning process along with the agencies and government that are impacting our neighborhoods. Next is funding. Many Black and Brown-led organizations in our neighborhoods are already stretched, and many are not focused on transportation. We're wanting to reduce violence in our neighborhoods, improve our schools, improve healthcare disparities, which Veronica talked about. So we're stretched, and I'm sure people who are watching this webinar know the reality is that Black and Brown-led nonprofits receive less funding than white-led nonprofits. So we're stretched, and we don't get the resources that white-led organizations get. So given that, funding is necessary for us to have an ownership in the transportation planning process. And USDOT allows for federal funding to be passed through a DOT or an MPO to nonprofits. Next is capacity building. Because many Black and Brown-led organizations are not actively working in the space of transportation, we need to build up our expertise to more effectively be advocates in that space. And next is power and decision making. When you invite us to the table, we don't want to just come and give you feedback. We want to have some decision making. We want to be a part of the design process. We want to be a part of the vision process. We want to be on the ground when the implementation is there. We want to be a part of the process when it's evaluating. Was it effective? Did it serve its needs? Power and decision making. We should share power and decision making. And next, as I mentioned, we want to be a part of the process to evaluate. Too often DOTs will come and say, we want to solve for this problem, and they implement a project. And we never find out, did it solve the problem? Did it reduce traffic violence? Did more people ride their bikes? Did more people walk? We never find out. So part of what we're saying here is when you solve for the problem, let's do some data collection, some analysis to confirm that it was actually solved. And in the event it wasn't solved, then we should go back and do something different to solve for that problem you originally committed to. And then lastly, community ownership is not something that we leave to people who have good hearts in the right seat at the right time. We policy that commitment and we legislate that commitment. And we need an operational framework to build out that policy and that legislation. I'm gonna stop there. I probably went a little too long, so hopefully that helps.
No, I appreciate that. I guess just a quick follow-up. What is that balance between that piece of like knowing that this bus only lane will help low income single moms get to work on time, or knowing that that bike lane is going to help that restaurant cook, you know, get home safely after a late shift? What's the balance between pushing through a project and informing the community? And Veronica, certainly, if you have thoughts on this too, feel free to jump in.
I'll be brief here, and I would love to hear Veronica's thoughts. So there were a couple of things I wanted to talk about in addition. So we think about what we call physical infrastructure and social infrastructure. So physical infrastructure is what DOTs and MPOs are known for, you know, implementing, you know, physical, you know, bike lanes or roads or transit stations. You know, that's the physical infrastructure, the hardware. We also think about social infrastructure, or what we call the software. That's the work to socialize people around mobility. And we will argue, Equiticity will argue, and some may disagree with this, the most important type of infrastructure that's important in our neighborhoods is social infrastructure. It does not mean we don't want the physical infrastructure. What we're saying is the social infrastructure should be first, so that people are understanding the impact of increased mobility. What does it mean to no longer feel compelled to own a car? We've created a community and an environment where people feel safe using transit or riding bikes. That social infrastructure helps us get there. When you have both, when we come to the table with both social infrastructure and physical infrastructure, I'm more confident that people in our neighborhoods will support the physical infrastructure, and I'm more confident that that we'll use it. You know, we won't fight against it. That's number one. And when it lands, we'll use it. We'll use transit. We'll use the bus only lane. We'll ride the bikes. And the element that helps us address gentrification and displacement, a few elements that come to mind. One is we need to do the work to arrest gentrification and displacement years before the infrastructure comes to our neighborhoods. You know, too often the infrastructure comes, gentrification accelerates, and then we're all like scrambling to put in policies to slow it down. It's too late. DOTs know some major projects coming in 5 years or 3 years or 7 years to predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods. There's some potential that could come with accelerated gentrification. So DOT should be working with the departments of housing, with the mayor's offices, to put in policies now to slow down that gentrification when it does start. And I think that's it.
Yeah.
I would love to hear from Veronica on that one as well.
And I'm gonna follow up because you said a lot. So one, I'm gonna put my activist hat on real quick. You know, I think the big challenge of gentrification, the reality is it comes down to money. And this is the challenge of a capitalistic society. Good, bad, or otherwise, it is a challenge because we can say, well, we should work to be able to keep people in their community as, you know, more amenities come. But the market says, that's cool, but I want to live in, you know, I want this thing, I want this neighborhood, I want this area. And even, you know, some of the best intentioned leaders, they want revenue, right? So that you can have more money in the coffers to do things. So it's like this thing that's really diametrically opposed. I don't have a solution for it, but it is a situation. And I think a lot of cities grapple with that. I know that my time in DC, I came to the DC region in 1997. And so I saw what DC was in 1997. You know, I saw the vision that, you know, mayors have had over time, and I see what DC is today. And even though I moved away 3 years ago, I'm like, I can't even afford to move back at this point. And it has become a city of haves and people who got in at the right time and have been able to buy up in terms of housing, and the have-nots. And everyone in between trying to scrap. And it's to Oboi's point, it's because of that, you have a lot of things in DC. You have the universal pre-K because you have the economics to be able to support that. You have books from birth for every child born in DC because you have the economics to support it. So it really is this kind of this diametrically opposed thing, and it's a very complicated thing, and I don't know, that's why I do transportation. But taking it to the other side, you know, a lot of it is the challenge of transportation is it takes a long time to get anything done. As Oboi said, you know, we do these 20-year plans, but like in 20 years, like, you know, and I've had old people, you know, older people that have said, baby, I ain't gonna be here. I'm gonna be in the upper room by the time you come and do this thing. And so I could say that, you know, cities are trying to move faster. We're trying to move faster. And I'll be honest, we trip ourselves up. You know, sometimes we move so fast because we're trying to implement what you've asked us to implement that we may forget to check in. But I'm trying to get it done. I'm trying to hit my metrics. I'm trying to hit my goals, and I did it. You said you wanted it. I did it. And now you're yelling at me, so I didn't come to tell you that I was going to do it. And that's the thing that we need to get better at. And, you know, even for the structure that I'm in now, it was set up to be a reactionary structure. And so we find ourselves in the crosshair because now we are being proactive. We used to just, nope, I'm just going to pick up this pavement and put the pavement back. But now I'm going to pick up this pavement. I'm going to change the function of the road because 4 lanes is way too much for this neighborhood road. And so now we are in the battle royale that's like, whoa, you have changed what I had been used to, and I want to speed fast on this road. But, you know, thanks to the steadfast leadership, we're able to get things done. So it is a process, and, you know, trying to build up the capacity within the organization to be more proactive, to be better about engagement. I'll admit, we don't do it right. I get beat up all the time, get beat up on Twitter now for not doing it, but we are trying to get there. But one of the other things that Oboi said that I want to make sure that it does not get lost to anybody on this call, regardless of whether you're in government, if you are an advocate, we have to think about the long haul, and that comes from legislation. We have to get it written in legislation. If you think about civil rights, it wasn't until the Civil Rights Act that you even got something, and it's a fight to get there. It's not a, okay, one and done. It's you have to keep going back. And I know people say, oh, the definition of an insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and getting the same result. No, I mean, sometimes you have to do that. You have to do the same tactic over. I mean, it took decades to get the Civil Rights Act, and it's going to take us, it's a long haul to get better legislation, to be able to transform the Department of Transportation so that we can have better projects, to then transform states to have better projects. And I want to make sure everyone hears that, because regardless of where you sit, regardless of the power you have, you do have an ability to make change. I know for us, we talk about Vision Zero, and a lot of cities have Vision Zero plans, and they're like, we can't get anywhere. But one of the things I will say that we took the time to do is, and it should be coming out soon, it's changing the actual design manual. Because you can't just say we're Vision Zero and then we're still doing the same designs, and then now you're expecting people not to die. But I want to make sure that if nothing else that you take away from this talk, for all of us, it is about getting these things changed in legislation, and it's not going to be a one and done. It is going to take a very strategic focus. It is going to take having people in key positions. You know, it is the tactic of you got to tackle it even from the local zoning commission. We talk about gentrification. Well, who's on the zoning? Who's on your zoning commission? Who's on your planning commission? Who's on your transportation commission? Who's on your bicycle advisory council? Your pedestrian advisory council? And it's at every level, being able to tackle and build people and get people in that can help move this conversation forward. And that is a long-term objective that we have to be focused on and be willing to put in the effort to do.
Yeah, you know, I'll say that all of my friends who do government work always say the same thing, that change takes a long time to happen because of the bureaucracy. But because of the bureaucracy, once you get that change, it'll take a long time to ever change it, right? And so the change can be lasting. Michel, I wanna get you back in here, and we had a question come in from Kim that I wanna throw out for you, and part of it is also related to this idea that, you know, as people get e-bikes, they can go on much further trips, right? So I'm curious if we know about all the benefits of e-bikes, how do we make them more affordable? And then Kim's question is, once they're more affordable, are there going to be better storage options, right? We know a lot of folks, all folks, but also low-income folks, folks of color, live in places where they don't have storage downstairs. They don't have elevators. They can't carry a 40-pound bike. And so talk to us a little bit about how do we get more folks to realize the benefits of e-bikes, make them more affordable, but then once folks have them, what are the innovations for them to be stored for folks who don't have the privilege of a locked bike storage space as part of the amenities of where they live?
Thank you for the great questions. Many aspects of it. I hope I will cover them all. First of all, affordability. Companies like iGo Electric are trying to make bikes more affordable by staying away from low-end bicycles and not trying to sell you the Mercedes and the Porsche, trying to get you what I like to call Toyota. Why do we see so many Toyotas across the world? It's because they give you this great value and you can afford it. So we need to encourage, at the legislation level, we need to try to encourage companies to be able to do that. Does it come through tax breaks? I'm not sure. I don't have the right answer exactly to that, but something that I know will work. And Veronica, you will like this. In Canada, there's a few cities or provinces, Laval, which is the third biggest city of a Quebec province, several years back came up with a subvention of $400 to whoever would buy a bike under certain conditions. The latest one was British Columbia this year, who came up with a subvention also, but this one was catered to people's revenues. I like this one way better because somebody who makes 80,000 a year doesn't need that subvention. Just go buy the bike, don't even negotiate, and good if you can afford it. But somebody who can't afford a $2,000 bike, a $3,000 bike, will need that subvention to let the car aside because this car is just not, is a money hole. That will help a lot, and that will level the accessibility for communities who $2,000 or $3,000, and those are not even expensive e-bikes, but this is where you start seeing decent quality that you should consider putting money in it. There's also lower end bicycles, but at the end of the day, this is supposed to be a green mean of transportation. So there's this middle where we want to stay and avoid also the bikes that will end up in the garbage after 2 years and we have to start over the process again. So I think subventions could be a good mean, helping the industry to make more bikes that will reduce the production cost will also help. And definitely if there's a government who is thinking of doing this with cargo bikes and they need my opinion, I'll be more than happy to give them my input on that, because that will help a lot in communities where there's too much traffic, not enough money for cars. You don't want more cars anyway on the roads. If you go in some countries in Europe where compared to Canada, we have tough winters, but in the States, you're lucky you have this opportunity where you can let go of the car and just use an e-bike. In Europe, you see that a lot. There's the bus stations or the train stations, there's a bike parking. You can even rent a spot. And so people will do the first, let's say 5 miles or the last 5 miles before to get to the public transportation. Or if it's a folding bike, they will put it in the train and then they will do the last 5 miles to get to the office. It saves a huge amount of time, but these bikes needs to be more accessible. Definitely the price needs to go down, but you don't want the value of the bike to go down at the same time. So it's a catch-22. You want to convince the industry to go cheaper, but at the same time, it's private industry. So the government has to jump in, I think, at this point to make it more affordable.
Yeah.
So I want to follow up. I'm sorry, Tamika.
Yes.
One thing I want to say, it's, I think, again, it goes back to our system isn't prepared to deal with e-bikes. If I'm a low income person and I just at least have a pay stub, I can go to a dealer and finance, right? 0% financing
Yes.
for 3 years, but there's no mechanism for that for e-bikes. Or in some cities that I had an opportunity to consult in prior to coming here, you know, there was no used bike market because you couldn't do it. Nobody wanted to deal with, you know, the paperwork in order to have a used bike market. So even as we talk about these bikes that may be $2,000 and $3,000 that someone doesn't bat an eyelash at, you know, if I have to move and leave my bike behind, there's no mechanism safely to sell it, like a true, you know, used bike market where you can sell that you see in the car market. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the structures around e-bikes to get it on even remotely the level of motor vehicles.
Yeah,
I agree with
you
that.
know, yeah, what I'm hearing is that, and I think, Michel, you said this perfectly, there needs to be more meeting of the minds between these private and public institutions, right? We need to be able to say, and I think Oboi said this when he was talking about, like, we got to look long term, right? We can't just look at the proliferation of e-bikes. I think we all have drank the water. We know how helpful they are. But to Kim's question, it's not helpful if you don't have a place to put it. And so some of these policies, right? And we do that for cars. You have a place to park a car everywhere you drive, right? And when there's not parking, people complain. And people complain and ask for more lots. And so there has to be some thought about this. We're coming up close on time. We had one more question come in, and I'm not ending with it just because I'm in a PhD program. But we got a question about, you know, there's been a lot of different parties who have been mentioned, but no one's mentioned the academic community or researchers or the way that they can help with innovation. And so if you feel it in your heart to answer that question, please answer that question. But if you don't want to answer that question, if you could just leave everybody with one final thought, and we'll go in reverse order this time. We'll start with Michel, so you can either talk about how the e-bike industry works with academics, or you can just share one final thought for folks before we sign off.
I would say one final thought. I agree with both Oboi and Veronica that this needs to be addressed through society as a cultural thing, and also through legislations. Cultures don't shift you need about 10 years to make a significant shift in one specific area of your culture. We need to educate, and through that is research. Definitely, I would say we need North American researchers to prove that e-bikes are getting people more fitter, that e-bikes are helping people to go faster to work, helping people to access things they wouldn't otherwise. Definitely that would help. I think it's a little bit of everybody's task here to get to the next level.
Thank you, Michel. Oboi?
Sure, I'll answer the question around research. As I mentioned, a pillar of our work is research. We work closely with academics across the country. Just to name a few: Kate Lowe at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and Jesus Barajas at University of California at Davis. What I'll tell you about research is that we need more research that makes the case for doing things differently, doing new things that haven't been done before. We want to make the case that, you know, social infrastructure is important and should be funded at the federal level, and MPOs and DOTs at the state and city. We need more research that, you know, shows the impact of transportation and improving life outcomes for marginalized communities. So working with academics, working with researchers is critically important, and we love to do more than what we're doing now. And again, I just want to say a special thank you to Veronica for writing this beautiful book and bringing your gifts to the world. And thank you, Tamika. Always a pleasure to be in your company. I've followed you both for many, many years and look forward to our continued work together. And Michel, pleasure meeting you. So thank you all.
Shared feeling.
So what I will say is, I think even in the research world and academia, Transportation Research Board, which I know many of the transportation nerds know on this, is the big body. And even in my membership since 2004, I've seen the shift away from highway research, pavement research, highway research, pavement research to, hey, pedestrian research, multi-solving safety systems around behavior research. So I think we're getting there, and I think there's more to come with that, and opportunities to bring the industries together, even with the small business research that is available through the funded by the federal government, to bring the academias and small business, particularly really brilliant business minds that are out there, to bring better products to market and also tackle some of these challenges. And my closing remarks is buy my book. As you know, that there is a discount. And I want you to read it, but hopefully it doesn't sit on the shelf. I want it to be that, again, I wrote a book that I want you to be able to go back and have each chapter speak to you for a different reason. Maybe you have a project and you want to focus on chapter 5 for how to truly structure, how to infuse engagement into your project. You know, maybe you need to do a power analysis, whether you're an advocate, whether you're a journalist, and all of those. You know, whether, you know, then again, it's the long haul fight. And I think chapter, 6 really speaks to that. Like we have to be in it, and we have to be focused, especially as elections are coming up, and not just focusing on the presidential election. We have to focus on every single level of election, down the school board, down the dog walk. We need to have a dog walker focused on safety and sustainability and equity. We really have to hit it at all levels. But please buy my book and let me know what you think. Feel free to link in with me. Hit me on Twitter at Veronica O. Davis. And just let me know what you think. If you have criticism, let me know that too. I appreciate it all, and thank you all for this conversation today and your time, and to be a part of this conversation. And Tamika, you know I got nothing but love for you. Thank you for your friendship, your kinship. You're one of my siblings, and even just taking the time to write the foreword, which has gotten a lot of people excited about the book as well.
Thank you three. Michel, thanks for joining us. Check out I Go Electric. Check out the beautiful city of Montreal. Oboi, thank you as always. Go to Equiticity's website, support them, learn more about their rituals and all the important work they're doing, and the great city of Chicago. And Veronica, you said in your book, if you were honest, you don't know if the transportation industry is ready to change. I think this conversation, I think the fact that we had almost 200 people staying with us the whole time, even though we're running 2 minutes late, and I think you are that change. You are one of the leaders. Thank you so much for writing the book. Buy the book, buy the book. And thank you to Island Press. Please check out Island Press, check out their other titles, their other authors. They are elevating folks who are writing important pieces about how to change the world, and in particular, a lot of folks of color. Proud to be a board member, proud to support the organization, and we hope you do too. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.